Hello.
Hello.
While in the process of self-transformation and making an effort to gain more presence, can someone take steps backwards? Is it possible for someone to experience a contraction of consciousness after an expansion?
Thank you. Thank you. It happens a lot. In some rare cases, people wake up and never fall back again. Very seldom. For most people, there are initial glimpses or realizations, which in Zen they call satori. And satori is not a lasting thing. Satori are flashes or short periods of the simplicity and depths of the present moment. Freedom, temporarily freed from the personality, and the ego subsides, and consciousness arises, and you just go, I made it. That could be a misinterpretation already. And often it happens that after a while, the old patterns, the wave comes back. The ego hasn't gone away, it just was dormant for a while, and then it woke up again, including perhaps the pain body. Oh, what happened? I shouldn't have gone to sleep. And the ego comes back in, and then the person says, oh, what happened? I lost it. Something went wrong. But the awakening process, what I call the awakening process, is a process which means it's not a continuous, usually for most people, it's not a continuous upward movement, but for most people it's coming into presence, or presence arising and then losing it again. Sometimes for longer periods, sometimes for short periods. It varies from person to person. But the progress tends to be more in like a spiral movement. Goes like you go, presence, and then you get challenged by something, and then you get completely identified with some reaction. So you go, and maybe you stay there for a while. And then you come out again because maybe the pain is too much, you can't stand it anymore, and then you go, and then something else happens. Perhaps your mind, some habitual thought takes you over again, and before you know it, it seduces you into following it where it wants to take you, and you go, and before you know it, you're back in this one. But gradually, tends to be more presence, and the presence deepens, so that you become less and less identified with the old patterns, emotional, mental patterns, particularly the deep-seated reactive patterns that take you over completely in certain situations. Only you can know where, in what situations you tend to lose presence. You have to look at your life and see, it may be with your partner, it may be with your stockbroker, it may be with your realtor, it may be with relatives family members that you occasionally visit, and every time you visit them you lose yourself completely in the old reactive patterns that have been there for 45 years. Family dinners at Christmas times, all sitting around the table. Then you can really experience the old patterns in people, and how one person triggers the other, and they go, oh, the same thing again. So when you have identified certain areas or situations in your life where you tend to lose presence completely, you get taken over by the reaction completely, then you can be alert and have a little talk to yourself and say, okay, I will see if I can stay alert, and just when I go into those situations, see if I can just use the situation as a practice for presence rather than go. So next time you go to your Christmas dinner, or in the States, it's the Thanksgiving when you sit around the turkey. And that's where families are, for many people, a huge challenge, because all the old patterns are there in the families. That's why, of course, if you think you're so enlightened, spend 2 weeks with your parents, said Ram Dass. Great test. And sometimes it applies to the parents. Let's say the older parents, they have adult children. You could say the same thing to the parents. If you think you're enlightened, spend some time with your adult children. That sometimes is a test too. Or an even greater test, your teenage children. That's a big challenge. So, be alert so that you know when just as these situations arise, you can see, okay, and then there needs to be, alert means there's a watcher there inside you that watches to see what emotions come up and what kinds of thoughts want to come out of your mouth, reactions and so on. So you watch, and sometimes you catch it before it comes. You don't suppress. Watching it doesn't mean you hold it down. You just see, oh, this is what wants to, the old, somebody says something and the old reaction wants to come up. It doesn't have to. Presence could be there and it dissolves in the presence. And then you say, you don't need to say the old thing again. It doesn't change that person anyway, whatever you say. So, and then perhaps you're silent. Oh. And if you don't feed the other person's patterns, they tend to collapse fairly quickly, because they can only thrive and feed on opposition. Many family patterns, conflict situation in families, they feed on each other. And if one of them becomes conscious enough not to react anymore, the other person will try, and it reaches into nothingness. Try to press a button, and the button has disappeared. Very frustrating. And then the pattern may well collapse, but be very vigilant, because if it's the pain body in them, the pain body has enormous cunning, and it knows exactly how to get the other person to react. It knows, it is very, very intelligent. It uses your own intelligence and knows exactly how to get the other person. So if it fails once, it will make another attempt. If one button has disappeared, another one may still be there. So it'll try all the buttons. All right. So the awakening process is, yes, this is why we call it a process. It's not a personal thing, really. It's an evolutionary process. We tend to look at it as some personal development thing, but it's not personal development. It's an evolutionary development of consciousness. And the old patterns, the egoic patterns, are not just personal, they are collective egoic forms that have been around for thousands of years. So what you are facing is not just some little personal dilemma. You are facing thousands of years of unconsciousness inside you that you inherit. But the wonderful news is you do not need thousands of years of presence to dissolve thousands of years of unconsciousness. As in the words of the Course in Miracles, it has taken time to mislead you so completely, but it takes no time at all to be who you are. So all the unconsciousness has taken vast amounts of time. But to be who you are, you cut through time, and you also cut through karma, through presence. Because otherwise, if you think time will eventually free you of karma, meaning karma, I'm using the Eastern term, karma means the accumulated unconscious mental emotional patterns that you carry around, that you inherit in various ways, genetically and in other ways, that you inherit. It goes from generation to generation. Those patterns that you carry are what we call karma. If you think that time will free you of karma, then you're wrong. Because karma just goes on and on. It loves time. It renews itself in time and through time. And it's only when you realize the power of the present moment, which is the sword, I call it the sword of presence, then you realize to dissolve the karmic accumulations that pretend to be a person. That's really what it is. The karmic accumulations pretend to be somebody, but it's just karmic accumulations. Those are dissolved only in the present moment by recognizing the power of presence. So then, of course, the answer to the question, do we need time to awaken, is no, you don't need time to awaken, but you may need time to realize that you don't need time to awaken. And now, all of you realize that because you've had your time. So you have had the time, and you have reached the point where you realize that you don't, otherwise you wouldn't be here. Except one or two who might have made a huge mistake by coming here. Because if you're attached to time, you want to carry on, then of course you shouldn't be here. But it might be painful to be here, and you probably have left already by now. So you don't need time, and you all have realized now that there is a dimension of consciousness that we call presence or awareness or whatever, or the transcendent dimension, and that frees you of time. It frees you of the delusion of time and the entity that pretended to be you, the person, all the accumulated content. Now, it doesn't mean that all the content of your mind immediately goes away and there's a complete empty space. No, the content is still there, but there's no longer a self-identification with the content. The karmic patterns are still there to some extent, although they get weakened. There's no longer a self-identification with these patterns, and as there's no longer self-identification with the karmic patterns, they get weaker and weaker and weaker. And you, the presence, emerges more and more fully. So, a wonderful process, the awakening process.